Welcome back to What You Will Learn. My name is Adam Ashton.
And my name is Adam Jones. We just interviewed Steve Glaveski, the author of the new book that's released today, Employee to Entrepreneur, and the host of the podcast, Future Squared, and the founder of the corporate innovation firm, Collective Campus, which goes all around Australia helping corporates become more and function more like a startup.
An all-round legend of a bloke. Steve was kind enough to give us an advanced copy of his book, so we checked it out over the last couple of weeks, and I really enjoyed the realistic and holistic approach to starting a business, not just the stereotypical quit your job and follow your passion idea. I found these much more relatable, and his podcast is great as well. He's had some phenomenal guests like Adam Grant, Chip Conley, and Big Bad Robert Greene. It was a phenomenal episode as well, and I'd say check out his podcast Future Squared, soon to feature Adam and Adam.
Yeah, we got interviewed as well. So head over there and check out his podcast.
Steve time. Steve, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we're going to start with a nice, easy question. Your mission. It's
My
a big mission.
It is a big mission. Our mission effectively is to unlock the latent potential of people to create impact in the world and lead more fulfilling lives.
Oh yeah, nice. And so how does that play out now? It's a good mission. It's a good why.
Yep.
How does that play out in the day-to-day world of Steve?
Yeah, so in the day-to-day world of Steve, this plays out at 3 levels. So Collective Campus is the organization I oversee, if you will. We are basically a corporate innovation and startup accelerator, and we've been around for about 3.5 years. And we work with anything from large organizations like BNP Paribas, National Australia Bank, through to startups. We've incubated close to 100 startups and helped them raise about $25 million US. And then we go down to the level of kids as well. Or maybe not down to the level of kids, but we also work with kids as part of our Lemonade Stand program, which is a children's entrepreneurship program we've been running for a couple of years now. And we're really excited that it's 2019 because this is the year we take our face-to-face program. We've turned it into an online platform, and we'll be selling this to schools this quarter, which is really exciting for us to have a scalable product rather than just rely on face-to-face facilitation of classes.
Yeah, it's an amazing vision, and you've just recently released the book Employee to Entrepreneur that comes out today at the time of releasing the podcast. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you started out in your corporate career, I'd imagine it was a slightly different vision. So can you just take us back to where you started and what you were going through in your minds back then in corporate, and how related were you to this mission that you're on now back then?
I would say I was totally unrelated or diametrically opposed, if you will. And I think like most of us, I was going through life trying to conform to society's expectations of what success looks like. And that, I guess, comes from upbringing. My parents moved to this country from Macedonia back in 1971. They didn't speak English. They didn't have any money. They worked really hard to give their kids an opportunity. And for them, they wanted to see their kids grow up where rather than work in a factory with your blue overalls, they wanted to see their kids wearing a suit, a tie, making good money, and again, conforming to society's expectations of success. And so that's what I did. I studied business and I got a master's in accounting, and I found myself working at Ernst & Young, which, I learned a hell of a lot there for the first couple of years. I think you can learn a hell of a lot in the corporate world when it comes to communication skills, planning, interpersonal skills. Like there's a hell of a lot you take out of that world. But at some point, I found that the learning curve tapered off. But to bring it back to your question, Adam, around the purpose really was just to make money and to be seen, to make money and to derive some sense of social status. But that, if you have some sense of introspection, will only take you so far. And eventually you start asking questions and you start asking what's the actual underlying why here? Because you'll find yourself with lots of zeros in your bank account. Maybe not that many zeros, but enough for a 29-year-old at the time.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, as I say in the book, I'd find myself on the train station platform over at Parliament Station, and then I'd just be questioning what did I actually contribute today? And it's ultimately a feeling of being miserably comfortable.
Nice. I think it is, as you say, early on, I think a lot of people fall into that trap of they have their main values as money and social status, and then some lucky people, I guess, add a few other different values into there later on. So what are some of those values that you've added in on top of, or perhaps instead of, the money and the status?
Yeah, so for me, it's been learning has been a massive value. Like I want to feel like I'm constantly being challenged and growing and learning stuff that I can apply, not just in the workplace, but also in my day-to-day life. Freedom. So there's a bit of parallels. There's a bit of a parallel here between what values I've added and, say, Dan Pink's book Drive, Mastery, Autonomy, and Purpose. So for me, those three are really the big three. And I talk about this in the book with the 5 Fs. So freedom, fulfillment, friendship. They're really the kinds of things that I value these days. Because you can give me money, you can give me social status, but unless I believe in the why, unless I'm learning and growing, and unless I have some form of autonomy to drive the direction in which I'm going and to really imprint my DNA on an organization or a project, then I'm going to be ultimately disconnected from that work and not really bringing my A game.
And the other thing you mentioned was the, standing on the train station and the platform thing. What the hell did I do today? I was definitely there myself in that, writing reports and making Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations. I don't know. It seems like a very small thing that there's not a whole lot of contribution there, and not a whole lot of benefit or value that you're creating there. So I guess what are some of the like the start of the book? You talk about some of the downsides, I guess, of the corporate life. Not to go too extreme, but what were some of the downsides that you saw that the corporate life wasn't quite giving for you?
Some of the downsides I would say would be that. Firstly, the nature of the work for me, and this isn't true of every corporate role because there's so many different types of organizations out there and different types of industries, so it's about finding one that really resonates for you. But for me, I was basically helping big listed organizations comply with their SEC, ASX, whatever regulations, and oftentimes making recommendations that weren't heeded, and you come back the next year and make the same recommendations. So that's definitely a downside where even the work you're doing doesn't seem to be creating any value for anyone. But it was really a case of a lot of political game playing, I found, rather than people taking ownership over their decisions and moving forward. The whole Jeff Bezos commitment over consensus. It was a lot of political game playing, a lot of meetings, a lot of time wasted, a lot of FaceTime. So people being expected to be in the office till like 7, 8, 9, 10 p.m. just to be seen in the office. And people often... I normally would try and leave by, say, 6, because I am a big believer in focus on the outcome, not the input. And that was fine. But so many people, I would ask the question, or I would pose the question, hey, man, why are you at the office till 9 p.m.? And they would often shoot back and say, well, my partner, he's still in the office, so I have to stay until they leave, despite the fact that no work was being done.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
That was... Yes, similar to my experience in an office. I remember the same people who would be working till 8 or 9 p.m. would be the same people you'd be walking in the office, and they seem to be taking 12 shits a day. Like,
yeah,
any excuse to get away from their desk, and then you walk past and you're on 9 MSN News, and you're like, hey, well, why are you here for 15 hours if you're doing nothing? You could probably get it done in 2 hours and go home. But yeah. Jason
Fried from Basecamp calls this the presence prison. Where it's basically prison. You're expected to be present despite the fact that you're not doing any work. And people have a lot of, as we say in Australia, smokers. They go out for a cigarette, or they might go to the toilet and look at their phone for 30 minutes and do all these sorts of non-consequential things. But it just means that they can somehow turn this presence prison into something that they can actually put up with for a few hours a day.
Yeah,
it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I'm sure there's a lot of people listening right now who really connect with this early part of your story, Astro as well, and myself included. So they might be sitting there, they're a little bit disillusioned with corporate. They don't see, they've got the same issues that you had. Now, what do they do next to maximize the best chance of them doing something they're really loving and productive in society?
Yeah, so there's a few things you want to look at there. I mean, firstly, it's not about just following your passion. It's more so around identifying, and your purpose will be malleable. People say find your purpose, but purpose will shift and evolve over time. But it is about, if you're going to take that leap and leave the corporate world, finding something that you truly believe in, I think, is really fundamental, because if you don't believe in it, you're going to give up when the going gets tough. For example, my first real foray into entrepreneurship was with a platform called Hotdesk, which was an offer sharing platform that I founded while I was still working over at Macquarie Bank. Literally spent a couple of grand building a prototype, wrote the press release to promote the prototype on my own, literally just Google how to write a press release, and then sent about 100 emails out to journalists. I found their email addresses through Twitter, and of course, one of the 100 emails, one of the 100 journalists got back to me, but they published a one-page article in the Australian newspaper, and that then got picked up in the Macquarie News, which is an email that gets sent out to 14,000 Macquarie Bank employees. So my manager tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, what's this Hotdesk stuff all about?" And I had to assure him that it was just a side project, until of course that article got the interest of investors, and 3 months later I'd raised about $156,000, and that was my ticket out of that corporate world. And I said, well, let's give this a year and see how we go. It's been 7, and there's no looking back. But the thing with Hotdesk was, it was incredibly easy to build the supply side. Like, there's so many entrepreneurs out there building two-sided marketplaces, Airbnb for dogs, Airbnb for cats, you name it. And the thing about that is, it's about 10 times harder to build a double-sided marketplace than a single-sided one, because you've got to get the business model right for supply, demand, and then you've got to bring it together in a way that makes meaningful sense. And for me, towards the end of that journey, I worked on that for a couple of years, built the supply side. Demand was okay, but nothing to write home about. I realized that, look, if I want to keep doing entrepreneurship, but if I'm going to play the long game, if I'm going to keep doing this for 5, 10, 15 years, I need to do something that I believe in, because that's going to get me up out of bed every morning with a spring in my step, and I'm going to bring 110%. And I just needed to move on, because I didn't want to be a glorified real estate agent. So the first thing definitely is finding that purpose. But the second thing, at the same time, you don't want that to be inhibiting in a way. You don't want that to paralyze you to the point where, well, I don't know what my purpose is. So even before that, like, if you're unsure what your purpose is, get out there, have different experiences, read different books, listen to different types of podcasts. And I talk about this in the book, and I refer to this as collecting the dots. Because as Steve Jobs said, you can only connect the dots looking backwards, not looking forwards. So a lot of people I speak to, and regrettably, they say something like, "Oh, I don't know what my passion, or more poignantly, what my purpose is." And it's really because they haven't done enough exploring. I'm not sure who it was that said genius is just the ability to see, but that ability to see comes from collecting a lot of dots. And then the pattern recognition that comes with that means that you identify opportunities that others won't.
Nice. So in your book, Employee to Entrepreneur, it's a book, obviously the title suggests, I was thinking, it's another quit your job and follow your passion, and jobs suck and the only way to enjoy life is business. But I really like that it started off with that idea of collecting the dots. So it's not just about that, it's about constantly learning and exposing yourself to new environments and new ideas. And I also liked not many of these sort of quit your job, follow your passion books start with the idea of, you gave a list of 10 or 11 things that you could do other than quit your job and start your business. So I think it's, I really like to, we're not just blowing smoke here, but we really like that, this idea of this business book that starts with, collect the dots, and then it starts with, hang on, this is not the only way. There's actually 10 or 11 different other things you can try instead.
100%. And so many people get enamored by the bright lights of entrepreneurship. They might read TechCrunch and Mashable and read about companies raising billions of dollars in some cases, or getting unicorn status. They might watch The Social Network or Silicon Valley's startup on Amazon Prime and things of that sort, and think, oh, wow, maybe I should just start my own business. But I believe it was Ariana Huffington, potentially, who said that entrepreneurs quit a 40-hour-a-week job where they're making 80K to work 80 hours a week and make 40K. It's really, really difficult. And before you even embark upon that, before you even leap to conclusions and say, okay, I'm going to become an entrepreneur, you want to take a step back and say, well, what are my alternatives? I mean, if you don't like your boss, then becoming an entrepreneur is a pretty radical step to take. Like, you can potentially make a lateral move inside that organization, or you can join another organization in the same industry. Perhaps you're just not too inclined to that industry or that type of work, and you want to move into a different industry, or maybe go back to school, get some new skill sets and do that. A lot of people I find just don't have hobbies or interests outside of work, and they just need to pursue that. I remember when I was working at EY, I ran a heavy metal nightclub once a week, every Friday night, called Madhouse. And my relationship with my work, my day job, became a lot more positive because I had this outlet on the side, rather than just quitting my job and becoming a heavy metal nightclub operator full time, which is probably not going to be a very wise business decision or life decision. There are a number of different things you should do before you even consider becoming an entrepreneur, unless what you really crave is that freedom, not being accountable to someone else. And the kinds of things you want to explore are fraught with uncertainty and risk, because you're probably not going to get a genuine opportunity to explore that inside the four walls of a big organization. Because if you're a big company, potentially listed, accountable to shareholders, it's short-termism, and the opportunity to do something that may not deliver an ROI in 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, it gets paid lip service to, but isn't really pursued. So
that's great. And on this idea of collecting, or not collecting the dots, but just making a whole bunch of dots so you can collect them in the future. I think in your book you say how learning's a big part of this. And what's your process of learning relevant things that are going to pop up dots that in future are going to have this beautiful line towards something that you end up doing?
Yeah, so a little bit of it is intentional, and then part of it is, as I like to say, positive serendipity in a way. So what are the skill sets? Well, firstly, where do I need to be? What skill sets are going to get me there? And then identifying best of breed books, podcasts, people who can help me get there. So basically standing on the shoulders of giants. And when I do that, it's not just a matter of reading, say, a book. It's a matter of reading the book, highlighting key sections, taking those key sections out, turning them into a Google Doc, potentially turning that Google Doc into a blog post, sharing those learnings with my team, maybe turning that blog post into a podcast episode, and then incorporating those learnings into conversations I have on my podcast, Future Squared. By actually teaching other people, I tend to retain a hell of a lot more of those learnings. But then also the next piece is applying it in my business. So if I read a book on, say, time hacks or automation hacks, actually applying that is going to make me, well, there's no point in reading a hell of a lot of books if I'm not going to apply it, right? So that's definitely what I do. And then also creating a bit of room for serendipity, whereby I will read something that isn't glaringly obviously related to my business, but will help me make new connections, where I could read something. For example, the most transformational books in my life haven't been business books. They've been books on, say, neuroscience, books on philosophy, mindset, psychology, because they help me better understand myself. And if I better understand myself, then the way I show up every day, the decisions I make are improved. And you are the sum of the decisions you make, right? So recent book I read, Why We Sleep by Matt Walker, who I think you guys should try and get on the show. He's phenomenal. That reminded me, or that informed me of the importance of getting 8 hours sleep a night, because for so long I was hustling and bragging to people that, hey, 6 hours sleep a night is all you need. But turns out those last 2 hours of sleep is where you get your deep REM sleep, whereby you regulate your mood, so you become a more pleasant person, life becomes more pleasant, and also that's where you become a hell of a lot more creative. So as an entrepreneur, not just coming up with the initial idea, but solving problems that will inevitably come up on a day-to-day basis, you can't afford not to get that 8 hours sleep a night.
Yeah, I love it. So it is important to be constantly learning. It's something I think you said in the book, you read a book every fortnight, podcast episode every day.
Yep.
So it's always constantly learning. So maybe, okay, we've been collecting the dots. We're constantly learning. We're open to new experiences. Maybe we've tried some of those 11 things that you suggest before, quitting your job and starting your business. If people are still enticed by this idea, okay, I think I want to do something heading towards entrepreneurial. How do you suggest people get started? And how do you suggest people get started?
Yeah, fantastic. What I see a lot of employees turn entrepreneur do, or the pitfalls I see them fall into, is 1, paralysis analysis, and 2, jumping to conclusions. So on jumping to conclusions, they'll have an idea and they'll think it's the best idea in the world. They won't share it with anyone. They don't want anyone to steal their idea. Problem with that is people won't steal your idea. Chances of that happening is like 0.01%, because who's going to take your idea that's got a 99% chance of failure, work with it for the next 2 to 3 years to turn it into something successful? Hey, good luck to them if they do that. But your competitive advantage today isn't about the idea, it's about the execution. And chances are whatever idea you have, there's 20, 30, 40, 50 people around the world working on the same thing. So it's about who can execute better and faster. So jumping to conclusions is one, and that manifests itself by people, say, hiring an app development company or something to that effect and paying them $50K to build a first version of a product before a customer's seen it. They'll probably take out a bank loan or spend their entire savings on that. They'll release a product, and lo and behold, crickets, right? And because it's been a big, hairy, audacious failure, what happens is they're like, wow, this sucks. I'm going to go back to the comfort of a paycheck, and they never return. The other side of that was paralysis analysis. So, and that's something that people learn or pick up. It's a byproduct of being in the corporate world, where you want everything to be perfect, because you are working in an organization where there is a lot of certainty. You're making money today. You've got customers. You're listed. You've got shareholders you're accountable to. Everything needs to be hunky-dory. You can't just be releasing stuff that's, half cut. And as a byproduct of that, what happens is when you jump out, you're thinking, well, I need this to be absolutely perfect before I move. But the thing with entrepreneurship, where there's a hell of a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknown variables, is there is no such thing as perfect. As Paulo Coelho put it in The Alchemist, you need to go on the journey in order to discover the answers. So the first thing people should do to avoid both paralysis analysis and jumping to conclusions is really identify what does the underlying business model look like. And at a high level, focusing or honing in on the problem, the solution, and the customer segment, and maybe even the revenue model. Once you've got that mapped out, it's about identifying what are the key make or break assumptions that underpin problem, solution, customer segment, and then finding a quick, cheap, dirty way to test that. So an example could be, and one example I provide in the book is of Uber. So if you went back to, say, 2008 and you wanted to test whether or not that kind of model would work, you'd ask yourself, well, what is the make or break assumptions that underpin success here? And the biggest one would be trust. Trust that I'm going to get into a car with a stranger, trust that a stranger isn't going to stab me through the back seat like it's a gangster movie or something, Robert De Niro styles. And how would you test that? Well, you could go out and build the app and spend $50K on that, and then spend a whole lot of money finding drivers and then doing your marketing to get the demand side on board. Or you could just go out to a busy taxi rank on a Saturday night in Melbourne at Flinders Street Station or something like that, and just talk to people in the line and say, hey, would you pay $20 to get home in a private car tonight? All above board, here's some driver credentials. Yes, no, and just speak to as many people as possible and see what percentage convert. You can do that in one night. It's a much cheaper test. It might cost you, a few $100s, potentially, maybe not even. It's just really your time. But what people do is they'll pontificate and deliberate, and they'll go out and spend a whole bunch of money on stuff that isn't necessary. And by doing that, you're getting the learnings you need much earlier, much faster in the piece, and therefore you can start to make more informed decisions. And that will also start to build your confidence as well as you start to get some positive feedback on that journey.
Nice. Yeah, it's something we hear a lot, but I think it's until you hear it, you don't realize that that's the way to do it. Start with something super small to test. What's the actual underlying thing that I'm trying to do here, and how do I test that? So I think that's super important. Another thing at the start, someone who's an employee wants to become an entrepreneur, maybe it feels like there's so much stuff. You've got to build a product. You've got to then market that product. Yep. You need to find customers. It seems like there's so much involved in starting a business. What would you say boils down to a couple of the most important things to start it off with? Because I'm sure there's a lot of those things that you probably don't need to worry about straight away.
Yeah. A lot of startups will preoccupy themselves. A lot of startup founders will preoccupy themselves with marketing and sales hacks and things of that persuasion. And that's because they have a false belief that the reason their business isn't doing well is because it's a marketing problem, but it's more likely than not a value proposition problem. CB Insights published a report last year that found which was around the top 20 reasons startups fail. Number one reason was market failure. Number 2, 3, 4, 5 are all byproducts of market failure, like running out of cash. Well, if you had a value proposition that made money, you wouldn't run out of cash, right? So that really is where people should focus on honing that value proposition and making sure that the product they're taking to market there is demand for, and people will pay more for that product than it actually costs you to build and deliver to the customer. Seems simple, but so many people overlook that. One thing a lot of entrepreneurs fall into the trap of is they start with funding. They start by thinking that, okay, I'm seeing these startups online, they're all raising funding. I need to raise funding as well. The problem with that is if you're not making any revenue yet and you go to market looking for funding, firstly, it's going to eat up a hell of a lot of your time. You're not going to be focusing on finding a value proposition. You're just going to be focused on finding funding. If you're successful raising, you'll raise at a very low valuation because you haven't got revenue yet. You'll give away a bigger chunk of your business. And you're probably going to raise from unsophisticated investors because you haven't got revenue yet, right? So, and then you become accountable to someone else. So if you left the corporate world because you didn't like being accountable to someone, well, guess what? Now you're accountable to investors, right? And the way some of those term sheets are structured, particularly with some VC firms, they could have what's called a liquidation preference in place, which means that if you do build a successful business and sell it for, say, $50 million, your investor might get $3 for every dollar they invested before you see a single cent, which means that you could work really hard to make someone who's already rich richer, and at the end of the day, walk away with very, very little. So if you are going to raise funding once you need it, right? Focus on the value proposition, focus on building a business that makes money. Then and only then, when you need that money to scale, you can raise from more sophisticated investors who are going to give you better terms, and you can raise at a higher valuation and give away less of your business. So that's one big pitfall that I see entrepreneurs fall into when they're just starting out. So focus on value proposition, not on funding, unless you're in something like biotech that requires millions of dollars to get going.
And you can probably do all this on the weekend with your income as well if you're making these minimum bets. So it's like a real benefit of actually not having all the time in the world and all the money because, you're finding the leanest way to do things.
Yeah, 100%, man. People throw around the term side hustle these days, and definitely the challenge with the side hustle though is if you're working full time, you get back home say 7 p.m. in the evening. You've only got so much time left. Not only that, but cognitively, like if you actually have a demanding job that requires you to think during the day, you've probably done all your deep work for the day. And so you're basically working with cognitive scraps at that point. If that's all you've got, great. You're going to have to make do with that. You've still got your weekends, but if you've got a family and kids, it can be difficult, right? So one thing I find people may want to consider is what I call a reverse side hustle. And this is where you basically, if you've been in corporate for a long time, if you've got a particular skill set, there's a lot of contractor roles that are up for grabs in that space. So you could get a contractor gig that pays really well in terms of a day rate. For example, when I started Collective Campus, the first 7 months, I worked over at KPMG in their innovation team. And I had a contractor rate that was close to $1,000 a day. So 2 days a week for me was enough. And then I had 3 weekdays where I could be completely focused on the business, cognitively firing from the morning. It wasn't scraps. It was my best self. And then obviously weekends on top of that. So that way you can bring a hell of a lot more to the table without sacrificing your day job. You've actually got money coming in, which is reasonable enough to keep you going. I'm not privy to your listeners' financial circumstances, but most contractor roles, even if it's 3 days a week, that still gives you 2 full days rather than say a couple of hours every night to focus on the side hustle. Yeah,
I love that idea of, because you're dealing with cognitive scraps otherwise. But that idea of, becoming a contractor, you might need to get the rare and valuable skills in the first place to be actually good enough to actually sell your own skills to another, to some kind of business. So I feel like there's this challenge and this balance between following your passion, quitting your job, and then going and doing something you love and so forth. But at the same time, having on the ground rare and valuable skills that you actually work really hard to do at, which might be mundane and a little bit boring. So I guess I don't really have a question, but what are your thoughts on that balance, and where do you see the other side of doing the mundane, boring stuff to actually get leverage and career capital, so to speak, so you can actually use this leverage to really start pointing where your career actually goes?
Yeah, well, a big part of collecting dots is really that work experience as well, which does help you determine where you want to go. And you find that a lot of entrepreneurs who are successful are working in this space where perhaps they had exposure to it in the corporate world. A lot of people come out of financial services and start fintech startups, insurtech startups, things of that sort. But you need to be objective about that and determine whether or not the learnings you're getting on a day-to-day basis are actually going to serve you, or whether or not you're just living a false purpose, like Robert Greene says, whereby, and this goes back to what we talked about earlier, people go through life just looking for status and money, learning a bunch of stuff that's not really going to apply elsewhere. Having said that, if you look closely enough, you're going to pick up a lot of transferable skill sets, right? The way you interact with people, the way you do research, planning, analysis, the way you identify certain opportunities in an industry. Like, you just need to look closely enough and not just discount what you're doing on the surface. And one thing I like to say on that, whereby people just look at the what, really look at the underlying things you're learning, but also the how. For example, if I'm a garbage cleaner, it's very easy to conflate that with I'm just a garbage cleaner, rather than I keep the streets clean so children have somewhere safe to play. That changes the game, but also the skills that they're going to learn as a garbage cleaner. Overcoming adversity, overcoming people's opinions of you, and as Seneca says, there's nothing worse than living life in accordance with other people's opinions. If you do that, you'll never be rich. But if you live life in accordance with nature, you'll never be poor. And that's why philosophy is so big for me. And as an entrepreneur, when you're just starting out, and I'm kind of going off on a bit of a tangent here, but when you're just starting out, it's very easy to compare yourself to your former associates and colleagues in the corporate world who are probably on six figures, living very comfortably. And if all you do is compare yourself to them based on that one metric, you're probably not going to last very long. You want to focus on learning during that first year or two, but also on the other things that they haven't got, like the freedom that you've got to really build your own life. That mindset shift is really key, particularly when you're just starting out.
Yeah, nice. As I said, I really liked the book that I was perhaps at first expecting quit your job and start a business, but it's really all the constant learning. You bring in psychology and cognitive biases. You talk about philosophy. You talk about procrastination. You also talk about 10xing your output. So towards the end, some of the things that you do and other people can do to really increase that output. You had a really popular article just in the last couple of weeks talking about your new approach to work. So tell us about that.
Yeah, and I guess that doubles down on what you asked earlier around what should people do when they start out. Like, so many entrepreneurs will focus on trying to do anything and everything in the business: marketing, sales, admin, product development, project management. But you can only do so many things. So identifying what are your strengths and doubling down on that, outsourcing, automating, or cutting everything else. So the article you referred to was the case for the 6-hour workday, which was in Harvard Business Review. And it's funny because it's so easy to fall into the trap of just working long hours, 12-hour days, 14-hour days when you become an entrepreneur, and stick to that. Because a lot of people may derive a sense of identity from that, and use it as a form of escapism as well. Because why should I go out and work on myself in the real world when I've got a business to run? I'm going to work 12-hour days, and I'm going to use that to justify not actually confronting myself in the real world and working on other aspects of myself, working on my relationship with my partner, working on being a better parent, working on, say, different hobbies, like taking up stand-up comedy or something to that effect, and just trying different things. But it's easy to say no to all of those things when you conflate your entire identity with your business. So these days, one of my big goals for 2019 is to work 6-hour days. So 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And the reason why I say that's a goal and why that's achievable is because nowadays you have so many automation tools online. You can take a step back. The way I approach this is I look at all the work that I'm doing, I look at the work that my team's doing, and I objectively determine which of these tasks can we either firstly automate or secondly outsource. And even before that, what do you want to cut from this? Like, what's actually adding value here? Are we just doing this because we've always done it? Or is it genuinely adding value? And when you do that, you can find yourself with a hell of a lot more time, because you could easily spend 12 hours a day doing all this non-consequential stuff that you can automate or outsource. But not only that, if you look at the science of flow, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, basically you can only really do deep work for 4 to 5 hours a day. And Cal Newport, who I know you're both a big fan of, says that as well in his book, Deep Work. So if I'm at the office until, say, 7 p.m. from 7 in the morning, I'm only doing deep work for about 1/3 of that time. So the rest of the time is basically residual, again, cognitive scraps. Rather than just sitting at my desk pretending to do work and looking at MSN and things of that nature. I don't know if anyone looks at MSN anymore. I could actually be out there living life, working on myself as a person, and I can come back the next day better, stronger, more mentally present. And so can my team. And that way we bring the best versions of ourselves to the office every single day, because I don't get into entrepreneurship to sit in front of a computer screen 12, 14 hours a day. I mean, I enjoy skateboarding, and I'm trying to learn how to surf, and I like being outdoors, and I like trying different things like stand-up comedy and whatnot. And that to me is a big part of life. Like that work-life integration piece is huge. And some people listening to this will say, well, that's not right. You know, you got to be hustling all the time. Listen to Gary Vee. It's all about the hustle, outworking everyone else. But not every hour was created equal. If I can put in 6 solid focused hours over 14 relatively focused hours, then I'm going to take that every day of the week.
Yeah.
Maybe not every day, maybe just Monday to Friday.
Yeah, that Gary Vee, his whole spiel, I loved it when I first heard it. But then, yeah, if you really think about it, it's a pretty dangerous routine to get into and not even productive.
Yeah, and people will often put their own narratives on you. So, for example, in Gary Vee's case, like, you know, I respect a lot of his, obviously, a lot of his work. He's a fantastic entrepreneur. But in his case, you know, he moved to the US from Belarus with his family. I think there was about 12 of them that shared a studio apartment, had it really tough growing up. But through a lot of hustle, managed to build a business for himself. And now he's one of the world's biggest influencers in the entrepreneurial space. So for him, that's his story, right? So he thinks that this is what everyone else should do because it worked for him and because he derives a hell of a lot of identity from that, which is understandable. We're all deriving identity and our worldview from our past experience and upbringing. But I don't think because it worked for him doesn't mean it's going to work for you. It's just the same as, say, a personal trainer who's going to give you their plan for getting big and ripped, but you've got totally different genetics, different different realities in terms of your family situation, your work situation, your life situation, where you live, all that sort of stuff. So because it works for one person doesn't mean it'll work for another. So that's something to just always be aware of, like who is giving me the guidance here and the advice, and why might it not apply to me, and why might it apply just to them as well.
Yeah, I really like it. And your final thoughts of the book, you talked a lot about sort of regret minimization. Like if you get to the end of your life, the things you're not going to be saying are probably, I wish I watched more Netflix, or I wish I checked social media more. How does that sort of tie into, you know, how you're living your life now and compared to, you know, projecting to the future and thinking back? What are some of the things I think you're probably not going to say?
One of the things I'm not going to say, I mean, for me, I'm definitely not going to say that I wish I did more valuable work, or that I connected with more people, for example. I mean, through the work I do, whether it's ambitious startup founders or whether it's, say, 10-year-old kids as part of a lemonade stand program, one of the proudest days so far that I've had at Collective Campus was when an 11-year-old who came through the lemonade stand program emailed me off his own volition and basically said, "Hey Steve, it's been 3 months since the program ended. Just wanted to say thank you for exposing me to entrepreneurship and showing me what's possible. I've since launched my online business. Here's a link. Again, just wanted to say thank you for showing me the way." And he actually closed out that email trying to sell me a stand-up paddleboard. Ended up buying a paddle and putting it up on the wall here, not an entire board, because the board was like $1,000. I was like, I'll take a paddle for $50. But that kind of stuff where you're actually having a transformational effect in people's lives, that's very empowering. And it's definitely not something that I will sit on my deathbed and think, oh, well, I should have done different kind of work, or... So it's definitely not the case. But I think, I did say something about human connection there as well. And I think it's easy to get derailed and focused just on your business at the expense of human connection. And that's one of my big things for 2019, focusing more on developing new connections with people who I normally wouldn't connect with or build connections with, because that is also a great source of fulfillment and contentment with what we do. So... yeah, and by doing the 6-hour workday thing, it gives you more time to do that, right? So, there's a plethora of tools out there. Just going back to that, that can help people win back their time. And just an example for content creators out there, there's a tool called repurpose.io. So if you were to create, say, a Facebook Live video, it would automatically turn that into a podcast episode, a YouTube video, an audiogram, post on social media, whereas so many people would do all of that themselves. So rather than spending, say, half an hour just creating the Facebook Live video, they end up spending 7 hours doing all of the repurposing themselves. And that's just an example whereby that kind of stuff applies across everything. We've got automation set up in conjunction with outsourcing tools. So for example, because we do B2B work, we have we have a virtual assistant who will identify media mentions. So if we track keywords like digital transformation. So if a senior executive at a company gets mentioned in an article around digital transformation, our VA will pick that up. She'll find their email address using LeadIQ. That will get imported into a automated email, which is personalized and gets sent out saying, hey, Mr. X, saw you got mentioned in this paper talking about digital transformation. This is what we do. We'd love a 15-minute conversation. Here's a link to book a time. That is super targeted and personalized, and it works a hell of a lot of the time. Like, we've won some really big deals on the back of stuff like that. And that's just, I don't do any of that.
That's
I just
phenomenal.
See the meeting entry come in. So I just wanted to double down on that because I think we kind of rushed over the productivity stuff. But, there's no point becoming an entrepreneur if you're going to have no life. May as well just work in the corporate world 8 hours a day, whatever it is, make a comfortable paycheck and still have your evenings and weekends to yourself.
Yeah. And this idea of automation, it's becoming more and more accessible every single day. It's becoming more and more powerful. I mean, if you look in 50 years' time, we've just recently read a book on artificial intelligence, which is Life 3.0 by Max, I'm going to say Zuckerberg, but it's not. Tegmark, there we go. I kind of just make things up.
Max Zuckerberg.
I kind of just go with it sometimes, which is wrong. But if you look at the longer horizon, this automation's coming wild. So it's people like yourselves who are getting on it really early. That people are going to capitalize on it most and get the most from it. One of the things we ask all our guests who come on the podcast is, what are your favorite and most influential books? For yourself, being an avid podcast consumer as well, we extend it to podcasts as well. So most influential books and also the podcasts that are impactful for you.
Yeah, so as I was saying earlier, business books for me are very helpful. You can stand on the shoulders of giants, learn how to build prototypes, test your ideas, better market your idea, sell better, all that sort of stuff. But at its core, the books that were most transformational for me are around mindset and philosophy. So Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, which are the journals he kept while he was the king of the Roman Empire back in like 120 AD. They were never meant for publication, but they were found after his death and now available under the guise of meditations. And the reason why that's so powerful is because he was preeminent. He was the ruler of the free world, yet so, I would say, humble to a certain degree, and so self-aware as well. Like, he would say things in there around pain. What is pain? It's just my judgments of it. If I remove the judgment that I am hurt, then the hurt itself is removed. And he would say things like, you have power over your mind, not external events. Realize this and you will find strength. Because it's so easy to go through life and be reactive to absolutely every external stimuli that comes up, right? And as an entrepreneur, you're going to face a hell of a lot of uphill battles. You're going to have proposals that you spend 2, 3, 4 hours working on after several meetings. You're going to send that out and that prospect is just not going to get back to you, not going to answer your calls, even though they said, yeah, man, we'd love to work with you. And that's called the counterfeit yes. People find it much easier to say yes to questions like, oh, yeah, you're interested in working with us, than it is to say no, because we just have this innate desire to be liked. So Meditations by Marcus Aurelius just gives me the grounding I need to focus. It's basically like, as Tim Ferriss says, it's an operating system in which to show up in the world with every day. And it just helps me make better decisions and not be at the mercy of emotion, if you will. Second book, Mindset by Carol Dweck. Just not even the whole book, just the whole concept of growth mindset versus fixed mindset, which helps, again, to help develop a positive relationship with adversity. Because if you want to do anything in life worth doing, you've got to be comfortable with that discomfort that comes your way. I'm currently trying to learn to surf, and when you're paddling out on this 8-foot board, it's really shaky and you have a wave coming at you that's about 3 feet high and it just knocks you off your board. It's very easy to just give up at that point. But when you have that relationship with adversity, when you are familiar with concepts like a growth mindset, when you realize that the obstacle is the way, to quote Ryan Holiday, you get back on the board and you keep going. And eventually, after 15 minutes of paddling out, in my case, you get into a position where you can turn around and actually catch a reasonable wave, or at least try without wiping out. But I think so many people just shy away from that discomfort at the first hint of it. And when you shy away from that, you shy away from opportunity as well. So that was the second one. And then the third one, probably a business book, just the Lean Startup, just because I think the whole notion of tight feedback loops, rapid experimentation, not only when it comes to entrepreneurship, when it comes to anything. Like if you're dating someone, hey, don't go on 100 dates before you decide whether you want to keep seeing them. Like, what are the values that you hold true? How can you determine whether or not they have similar values that you can build something together? Because values alignment in relationships, in business, in teams, in your work status, like who you work for, do you align with the values of that organization? I find it's really key to build a sustainable relationship with something. So yeah, lean startup, mindset, meditations. Nice.
And I like that even though obviously, business books give you the practical skills, but meditations and mindset, they're more about the mindset, I guess, the overall approach rather than the specific skills, but just that one way to shift the way you look at the world rather than, one specific how to sell X. But this is, the books that are just an overarching idea as to an approach. So I really like that for sure. We talked about your book, Employee to Entrepreneur, but we haven't talked about your podcast yet, Future Squared. We had a few crossover guests, Chip Conley,
Kevin Kelly,
Andy Duke. And you've had some other great guests as well. Adam Grant, and a big one I'd recommend, obviously Robert Greene was awesome. Tell us a little bit about Future Squared, and you do some book reviews on there as well.
Yeah, I've done a couple of book reviews. Incidentally, Robert Greene's 33 Strategies of War, which, coming back to what we said earlier, like learning and reading disparate topics allows you to connect dots in unexpected fields. So a lot of those strategies of war, whether it's Napoleon, whether it's John Boyd, the military strategist, and his concept of the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. The faster you can do that, the better decisions you can make to outgun your opponent. You'd be surprised what you can learn, say, from the military that you can apply to entrepreneurship. But on the podcast, that just started out as something about 3 years ago. It was just going to be like a marketing channel. Let's just see where this goes, get some big names on, and maybe enough people will listen, and we can tailor the conversation to be around corporate innovation. And that's what it was initially. It was people like Steve Blank, David Burkus, management thinkers, just talking about how to be innovative inside a large organization. But as I say, you go on the journey, the path presents itself, and I started talking to all sorts of people, not just corporate innovators and management thinkers. Started talking to neuroscientists, philosophers, psychologists, entrepreneurs, like you name it. And today the podcast is all about helping you navigate a brave new world. That's the tagline, because the world is fast changing outside our walls. Moore's law, your listeners will be familiar with that. Over the next 10 to 20 years, up to 45 to 50% of jobs will be replaced. And the only way to really navigate that uncertainty is to build a better relationship with it. As Stephen Hawking said, intelligence is the ability to adapt to change. So what we do on the podcast is we just bring together all sorts of preeminent thinkers across so many different disciplines, so that people can learn what they need to learn, collect a lot of dots so that they can make better decisions. And we're about 304 episodes in now. The most recent episode was with Robert Greene on his book, The Laws of Human Nature. So that was a really fantastic conversation. But for people out there listening who thinking about starting a podcast, give it a go. For me, not just the marketing stuff, but building relationships with people like Robert Greene, like Adam Grant, who has endorsed my book. It's up in lights on the front cover. Becoming a better conversationalist, listening better, learning the art of podcasting, learning the marketing skills that come along with that. Like, there are so many benefits, and just more human connections as well, going back to that point.
Yeah.
Love it.
Phenomenal. And everyone can find that everywhere you find podcasts. And people, if they want to find your book, which we definitely recommend, where should they go?
Yeah, they can go to employeetoentrepreneur.io. They can also download a bonus bundle on that website, which is completely free, which has growth hacks in it, sales strategies, ways to test your idea and experiment faster. Just a lot of free goodies. But if they go onto Amazon, they'll find the book as of January the 9th, today.
Sick. Fantastic. Love it. Thanks so much, Steve. Great to chat. And all the best with the book.
Fantastic, guys. It's been a pleasure.